right. Welcome back to Sub CLE. Today, I'm a little excited again. I know I say I'm excited all the time, but I am. Today, we have another non musician, which is kind of cool. Getting a little diversity around here. Now, maybe one day a female will be on this show. Actually, we started with one. But today, we have a producer. You might know him from, if you're old enough to remember, US Rocker in Cleveland back in the day. Sean Carnage, welcome.
Thank you, Vince. It's great to be on the show.
I said you're a producer. So what does that entail? So you
Yeah, so I was a weird kid. I always wanted to be a producer. I didn't even know what that meant. But Cleveland is really the place where I learned how to do that stuff, and that's my career now. I basically put projects together, and I got my start. I learned that from local people in Cleveland, like Derek Hess and Pat Hanich from Pats in the Flats, and the guys that speak in tongues, and Kathy at the Grog Shop. Sort of how to put events together, and then. I also learned from people like Brenda Mullen and Trent Weller, who were doing US Rocker. I came on board to help them, and I learned how to produce like print things, and I've just sort of gone from there. I've been like a digital survivor. We had a recording studio in Cleveland, recorded bands like Gordon Soley Motherfuckers and Nine Shocks Terror, and the Conservatives, lots of Cleveland bands, and then. In LA, it's just been kind of the same thing. I've been a concert producer, and I've also now work as like a digital producer in the branding world.
Oh, nice. Okay. So, all right, let's go back. We're going to rewind all the way back to the beginning. So now you didn't grow up in Cleveland, or you weren't born here, or how does that work?
No, I wasn't. I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, which my friends from Charger Street Gang always called the Mad East Side of Cleveland. Cleveland was always a destination to us. It meant West. It meant big city. It was a place. It was when you grow up in a small town, it's like you're New York City, right? And I know a lot of Clevelanders don't think of Cleveland as New York City, but it was like a big deal. I had family in the area. I had an aunt and uncle who both lived in Lakewood. My dad went to school at John Carroll, and I have a aunt and uncle who live in Twinsburg. So we were, coming to the area to go to like the Natural History Museum, the Art Museum, and, go eat at restaurants and eat kinds of food that we didn't have in Erie. And, it was always a place that was like all about pleasure. And then, when I got my license, we used to skip school and we could drive an hour and a half to Cleveland, go to Record Revolution, go to Record Exchange, go to Sweet Lorraine, which was the vintage shop on the west side, and then drive back and be back and have the car back at my house. And my mom would think that we had gone to school. And so that was fun, hanging out on Coventry. And then, going to concerts. I was, a huge music fan, and this is kind of like the post-punk era. And, I'd watch the Erie paper, and they would have listings for like Buffalo and Pittsburgh, but the Cleveland section was like 3 times as long as Pittsburgh. And it was like, wow, Cleveland's really happening. Got to go there. And the first day I had my license, I drove to Peabody's Down Under, and I saw the Pixies on the Doolittle tour with the Happy Mondays opening, classic 1989 show. And, I was like, Cleveland is a place to be. This is amazing. Right. I am going to move here.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people say that or said that back then, but I did it. I got accepted to Case Western Reserve University, and I moved to Cleveland in August of 1990. And kind of the rest is history.
So you said you were hanging out in Coventry. I mean, because back in those days, now it seems like that kind of culture has kind of permeated throughout everything. So you can find like a little bit of that bohemian, like in everything, vegetarian and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Different like cliques and, different, just, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but different people, that are into different things, different culture, subcultures, But back then, Coventry was pretty much that was the area. Do you think it was because the college there, Case was there, or whatever?
I mean, I don't know. Coventry was like, living in Erie, we were also sort of not that long of a drive from Toronto. So Toronto was a place I had always gone to get like import cassettes and
Hmm.
T-shirts and things for like Bauhaus and all these bands that I was
Right.
into at the time, The Cure. But then when we discovered Coventry, we realized, oh, you don't have to drive to Toronto. You could.
Yeah.
This is where you could get like Manic Panic. Like I've
Yeah.
only seen this on in magazines, like when bands do interviews, like how'd you get that green hair? It's like I used Manic Panic. Like back then, that was like an underground thing. Like Doc Martens, where do you get them? And you could get
Right.
them on Coventry.
Hmm.
And I still have those albums I bought on Coventry, things like Sparks and The Fall, and all these kind of like classic weird bands that I never. You couldn't even dream of getting those records in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Right. It's you take that for granted, I guess. And I thought I had to travel at like that big 20 minutes to go to Coventry. I thought I was the outsider.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started. Later, when I moved to Cleveland, I started to meet Clevelanders, townies.
Yeah.
I became a townie later on. But
Yeah.
at the beginning, I'd be like, "Oh, have you done this? Have you done that?" Because I was so hyped on being in Cleveland. I was
Yeah.
like, I would walk from Case because I have a car. I would walk from Case up to the Coventry every weekend. I would get on the bus and go down to the Agora or to the Flats, and I would meet people from Cleveland. They're like, "I haven't been to the East Side in 2
Right.
years." Be
Yeah.
like, what?
I know it's
What?
crazy. Well, I think that's like that in a lot of cities. If you're from there, it's like you don't do a lot of the tourist things that are there. And I think that's always kind of strange. Just growing up in the suburbs, I know a lot of, some friends of mine that just don't even leave the little suburban city that they live in. And it's weird. Yeah. Just to not get out, but not even to get out of the greater city area. But I wanted to know, like, so you went to Case. What were you studying?
I've always been a really ambitious person, Vince, but I've also been a person who like changes a lot. So I went there for art conservation. I wanted to learn how to repair, um, uh, you know, antiquities like paintings, sculpture, things like that. So
Okay.
I went to Case for chemistry, and I was at the Cleveland Institute of Art for Art Studio, and I was at the Cleveland Museum of Art, which has a I don't know if you know this, has a world renowned art preservation department there. And so I was starting to apprentice there. I got a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. I was working with this woman, Ellen Landau, who was on the art history uh, uh, faculty at
Hmm.
Case Western Reserve. She was writing a book on Lee Krasner, who's like the mistress of Jackson Pollock. And that was at a time when a lot of women's studies were kind of getting going. So I was around all this heady stuff.
Right.
It was awesome. But what was I doing? I was going down to the Euclid Tavern, drinking Rolling Rocks, and pretty
Right.
soon I wasn't in school anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't care because I have always been like a huge Andy Warhol fan, right?
Hmm.
And I think the essence of Andy Warhol is embracing the pop culture that's around you at the time. And at
Right.
that time, rock and roll, grunge, metal, all these things, hip hop too, it was it was so much more happening than anything in the art world. And I also realized, my parents are teachers. I realized art conservation, I'm going to have to, like, for the rest of my life, have these huge student loan bills and be like fighting for tenure. And like, I don't want to do that crap, man.
Yeah.
I want to write about bands. I want to like throw shows. Maybe someday I'll play in a band,
Right.
And besides the Euclid Tavern, which was walking distance from my dorm, there was also WRUW, which is where I really found my tribe, and all those people, I'm still friends with, and they connected me with the people who were really from Cleveland in a lot of
Yeah.
cases. Eventually through those connections, I met people like Tony Erba and and even later on, like Steve Eggs, you know,
Yeah.
I got to meet the real Cleveland, you know, and that
Yeah.
was really cool.
The college radio, like, now there's the internet. It does, kind of, outshine the whole college radio thing. But that was, you would look forward to certain shows, like Bill Peters, on Friday nights and stuff like that, and I don't know how popular it is now. I don't know if I'm out of touch or whatever, but I think WRUW. Well, right. That was, yeah, Case, right? So um, you, you don't even have to be alumni to have like a show on that, right?
No, you can just go and get your license and apprentice, and
Hmm.
they call it assistant programmer or whatever, and then you become
Yeah.
a programmer, and then you can get a show. I mean, I left school, but I kept on at the station for like about 10 years.
10
So I
years.
was on the radio from 1990 till I think 2000 or 2001. I was trying to figure it out the other day, but
Hmm. And what was
but
the show?
I did a bunch of different shows. I was usually on in the morning. Let's see, what were some of the names of the shows? TV's Lovable Dad, that was one of them. And we would just pick. Uh, my main one, though, for most years was Born to Go. And
Okay.
Born to Go is a Hawkwind song. Hawkwind's my favorite band. And that's one of those really driving ones with Lemmy on bass. So, we
Okay.
were born to go. You know, are you familiar with that one?
Uh, so I know that Lemmy was in Hawkwind.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so yeah, that's like it's like one of
The
those things.
final
I
frontier.
never really got into it, so I wouldn't know. Yeah,
You got to cross the
I
time
know.
space barrier there and get into Hawkwind. They're
I know.
like the
Trust me, I
they're
hear it
like
all
the
the time.
heavy metal Grateful Dead from England.
Yeah. See, I never saw Blade Runner until about 5 years ago, and I had to hear about that my whole life. So,
Well,
so
you got
Hawkwind's another one.
Hawkwind. Just
Yeah,
go
yeah.
pick up any random Hawkwind album. I've come to the conclusion they're all good. But anyway, like my main show was Born to Go, and I would try and play like a mix of like I mean the term stoner rock didn't exist back then, but I would try and
Right.
play like grunge bands and also classic bands and like trippy noise
Hmm.
bands, which were kind of popular in the early 90s. You know, there was kind of like an industrial thing happening. I was never into industrial, but, you know, I could pull out tracks that sounded really trippy from different
Right.
industrial bands, and I would play them all together. And I'm still really proud of that show. That was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
So,
Yeah.
did that you kept changing the idea? You were there for 10 years, but it wasn't consistently the same show for 10 years, or
We got into doing this thing called Destructions, which is a totally the wrong name for it, but that's what we called them. So some of these other shows were Destructions, and
right.
Destructions were basically like jam sessions on the radio. So we
Okay.
would get Cleveland musicians and radio DJs to come in, and we were very inspired by things like Negative Land, and
Hmm.
we would layer cassette tape and DAT, digital audio tape playback, and they have these things. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They're called cartridges, and they look like 8 tracks, and it's what the classic radio stations would have like their promo spots on.
Right.
We would
Okay.
put noise on them, and then we'd have like somebody playing live. We'd have somebody like Neil from Craw playing drums.
Yeah.
We'd have a guitar player down there, and we would just basically use the radio station studio to just send this like trippy noise out.
Wow.
And so some of those shows, uh, I wish I had recordings of them. They were so much fun to make. Because this is the pre-digital era, I'm not actually sure what they sounded like, but they were really fun.
Nice. So, at the time you were doing this show, were you doing something else? Were you working with US Rocker at the time?
Well, I've recently sort of traced the origin story of US Rocker, and I was not a founder of US Rocker. It was
Okay.
founded by this woman, Brenda Mullen, and her friend Trent Weller in 1989. I actually have a stack of them right here. Can I hold it up? I do show and tell. This is the
Please.
original US Rocker right here.
Okay.
So, look at that. A little bit of
That's
XYZ
the
on the
issue
cover.
one.
A little XYZ and
Yeah.
a little
Soraya, LA
LA
Guns.
Guns. Yeah, look at that. Pretty nice, huh?
So now that publication was out of Cleveland.
Yes. And
And
so this is what happened, Vince. I dropped out of school, and Cleveland is a fucking harsh place if you don't have a job, right? You got to
yeah,
pay that heating bill. I was living on Mayfield Road, 2620 Mayfield Road, and I had a high school job back in Erie at Office Max, which was a Cleveland company. And I was like, I'm going to apply at the Cleveland Office Max, store number one, which was in the Golden Gate Plaza up on Mayfield Road.
yep,
So this is kind of a pivotal moment in my life. I got that job, and I would ride the bus every day, all the way up Mayfield, this massive ride.
yeah,
And they were these real characters on the bus. The bus would stop at Coventry. That was the first stop. And
yeah,
this guy would get on. He'd be like, and all the old ladies would be like scared, like white knuckle gripping this huge guy. And he
right,
puts his head down and he's like blowing his nose and wiping his brow. And he's got a pentagram drawn on the top of his head. And he's got these wild eyes and he's like a total smoker and he's like coughing up a lung. And he goes and he sits down. Chris
yeah.
Smith from Keel Hall. That's how I
Oh,
met him, riding the bus up and down Mayfield.
that's awesome.
So it was great. On the way up to work, Chris worked
And
up there somewhere too. I would shoot the shit with him or just sleep. But on the way back, that's a massive ride, stopping at
yeah,
every light. So I started picking up free periodicals like US Rocker, and I became a total fanboy of
yeah,
US Rocker.
really,
And I was like, man, this music is whack though. I love what they're doing, but XYZ, come on, man. Like, don't put that shit on the cover. That shit sucks. And because I was from a younger generation, they were like 5 or 7 years older than me. And I was definitely like grunge, noise rock, hardcore. My tastes went from post punk and got way harder. I was the opposite of most people who usually start out listening to gnarly shit and then get more mainstream.
right,
I went the opposite way. I
yeah,
was into like Bolt Thrower and fucking, Motorhead
yeah,
and I was into Helmet and the Melvins, and these were really underground bands at the time. And so I eventually met Brenda from US Rocker at the Euclid Tavern.
mhm,
Anastasia Pancios introduced us, and I was like, "Oh my god, you're Brenda! You do US Rocker! I want to write for that." And she said, "Well, send me a sample of your writing. Maybe you can." And I sent
yeah,
it to her, and pretty soon I was writing. And a few months after that, Trent, who was becoming very successful as like a tour manager in the concert industry, he left US Rocker, or kind of pulled back the amount of time he was spending on US Rocker, and I became like Brenda's right hand dude. And later on, she sold the magazine to me, and
mm.
we published the magazine for about 10 years. So I
Oh
was the
wow.
publisher.
So I'm curious because again, I'm going back to the whole musician thing, but I'm always curious about inspiration, and I know writing. I went through the college thing, did a lot of writing, and I've actually even interviewed some people and did some reviews and stuff like that. And it's interesting when you actually and even some just fun writing, but I'm wondering like where it is you draw. Like when she said, "Give me some of your writing," have you ever written before? Did you have a passion for it? How does that feel?
So this is another pivotal story for me. The fact that I have a career and that I got involved with writing is really thanks to Steve Jobs from Apple. Thank you,
Yeah.
Steve. I went to this place in Erie called Mill Creek, Pennsylvania, called
Hmm.
McDowell High School.
Okay.
And when the senior high reopened in 1988, we got a grant. The school got a grant from Apple, which was something that Steve Jobs was doing at the time. He actually had left Apple at that point. John Scully was running Apple, the guy from
Hmm.
Pepsi. But before Steve left, he had given a grant to our school, and they gave every single person a Macintosh.
Oh, really?
The box ones with like a
Yeah.
handle on top. Though I don't
That's
know if
just
you
great
remember this.
marketing.
Yeah, great. I mean, I'm talking to you using an Apple computer with my iPhone right here. So
Yeah.
here's looking at the long term, Steve. Good job.
Right.
But so you're asking about writing. So
Yeah.
I learned desktop publishing in 1988 and 1989. We were using things like PageMaker and
Hmm.
this little program called Photoshop that no one had ever heard of before, Photoshop
Yeah.
1.0. And I published a fanzine already in high school. And when I moved to Cleveland, people thought I was like a wizard, like magic. Besides rock and roll, part of the reason I left school was I couldn't make any money there. I was not a well off kid, but because I had gotten some scholarship money, I didn't qualify for work study. So I was not used to being poor. I've always been a hustler.
Right.
And pretty soon I was able to use my desktop publishing skills to make money, like just as an
Yeah.
hourly rate. And that was very, I now looking back, I'm like, I wish I'd taken more time in college and not started working right away. But I've basically been working, since I was like 16 on various things. But I've been working in like on computer stuff since, you know, um, 1989 or 90, so I had a dream to start my own magazine called Crack, and it never came out because I never had the money to actually print it. But
Yeah.
I interviewed bands like the Boredoms, and I had this rather infamous interview with George Clinton from Funkadelic down at the old Agora, where he
Hmm.
was like high on cocaine, and I was like
Yeah.
18, and I had no idea what was going on. But he kept doing cocaine, and I brought two 90-minute cassettes with me, and he filled, talking to him, he was just like blah blah blah, over 4 hours. He filled both cassettes, and pretty soon I'm like, I don't have any sides left to turn the cassette over on to keep recording this. So I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I guess the beginning of the interview wasn't that great. So all of a sudden I'm recording over the beginning, and I ended up with like 180 minutes of like circular George Clinton talking.
That's cool.
I didn't know anything. It was really Brenda who showed me how to actually put out a magazine.
Yeah. Well, but the whole writing process though, like when you're writing, are you just trying to be completely honest, or is it like obviously do you get into that zone that everyone kind of talks about, or
Um, I don't know. I've never been a purist, so I think sometimes purists don't really rate me very much. I'm a follower of William S. Burroughs,
okay,
and I really feel like I mean, maybe you know this. I think everybody knows it intuitively, but I'll just say it. Everything you look at, taste, smell, hear, it actually changes your brain. It
hmm,
changes the composition of your brain. The memories that you make, the sensory processing that happens, there's actually cells change inside your brain.
right,
It's very science fiction, right, to talk about it that way, but William S. Burroughs did, and he was very influential on me. And so I've always seen writing and publishing and making music as a way to actually go into someone's brain and change it.
oh, okay,
I know that
yeah,
sounds really trippy, but it's
yeah,
true.
yeah, that's interesting. So, but that is so. It's when you sit down, do you have a I mean, because obviously, there's people that go into it, and they're just looking for shock value, or they're looking, I mean, are you just trying to be, we talked a little off camera on this, but as far as you're documenting things, do you just want to try and be as honest as possible, or do you want to put in your opinion in some way? Is that how you're like having people, how you're changing minds? Is it by like influencing them with how you may see the world, or are you trying to be like objective about it?
I mean, that's changed over time. When we did US Rocker, with writing about all the great local bands, from Face Value to Keelhaul to
Mm-hmm.
Craw to what have you, all the great bands of that time. We weren't trying to, Nucleon, Red Giant, all these people. Um, we were definitely partisan. We were trying to get our opinion in there.
Okay.
Um, I mean, this was an outlet that we had created. Why would we not do that, right? We had a mission.
Right.
And it was very unifying, and it
Yeah.
drew a lot of people to us who liked all different kinds of music, and that was awesome. I think now that that's in the rearview mirror, we were talking off camera about this, but now people call me a new name, which was a name I didn't really understand, which is archivist. And I think I am still learning what that is, but
Mm,
now I do feel a responsibility that's more neutral to just presenting my collection. I have a significant collection of Cleveland periodicals, photos, press kits. I have a whole filing cabinet over here of every press release and press photo we got during the 10 years we did US Rocker. Um, and I recently contributed my photos to the new Speak in Tongues book that just came out. And So now it's a little bit different. Now I like to present it more neutrally with
mhm.
just a little bit of my uh, memories, my perceived reaction, because I'm not sure it's my real reaction anymore. It's been so long. It's those cells are pretty old in there now. My brain was changed, but it's pretty old. Now it's more a little bit more neutral. I'm
Right.
you know I'm really grateful for the people I know in Cleveland. I've spent the last. I was just looking at my website, which is SeanCarnage.com, and there's a
Mhm.
tab at the top where you can go and see all the Cleveland posts. And I have over 77 posts up there about Cleveland. And then in the past year, I've added almost 30. So I write
Good.
about Cleveland almost on a daily basis, but it's not the current Cleveland, of course.
Right.
It's kind of a faraway Cleveland at this point.
Okay. So you were saying with U.S. Rocker when you get on, obviously you weren't into Sticks and LA Guns and what was that? Soraya? Was that what that was?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Because we had spoke and I had seen some of those covers. You had sent some over, and I was thinking the same thing. I was like, why would a Cleveland publication have like things like that? Why wouldn't it be more local? But I don't know. I'm a local. Obviously, I'm doing a subculture Cleveland show. You know what I mean? But did you have something to do with maybe introducing more local talent into that publication?
I mean, I did. Yeah.
Okay.
I was, I, so that goes back to the whole Andy Warhol thing. Like, if you want to create a scene, if you want to create a movement, you have to embrace what's around you, because in this life, if you're waiting for approval to come from outside and tell you something is good, you will
Right.
always be at the mercy of outside forces. We have this incredible ability in our lives to decide for ourselves what's important. When we say something's important, it's important to us.
Yeah.
It's nice when you share that with other people too. But in this case, we did. Everybody knew that Cleveland was really happening, even if we
Yeah.
weren't getting. Here I'll show you something.
Yeah.
Great. So here's the total run of US Rocker. Okay,
Okay.
this is every. So let's just cut it in half. Okay,
All right.
let's just cut it in half and. Okay, so it was around for 10 years, and this is really where I came in, which was 1993. And
Okay.
this is where I was starting to have a significant effect on the paper, right? And as you can see, we're starting to get craw on the cover there.
I see.
So, things started to change to the point where when you get just a couple of years later, and look, we got this beautiful Dave Cintron cover. Look at this.
Well,
We've got Eric's mother from Columbus, and um, you know, my dying. Oh, I guess none of those other ones are Cleveland bands, but anyway, you started seeing like a Cleveland artist and a Cleveland band on every single cover, and then to the point where you get into the later years, then we're really going full force with local, where you've got like there's Pile of Eggs right there.
right. Yeah. Nice. That's cool. Nice. And you were working with different artists. What were some of the artists that were contributing there?
Well, I think we're pretty widely recognized as the place where Derek Hess got his start, as an artist. Besides doing flyers for the Euclid Tavern, he did some
Right.
really amazing art for us.
Nice.
Check this out. This one's cool. Melvin's.
Nice.
This is here. I mean, there's so many, but we were big fans of this band, Mushroom Head.
Yeah, right. Little known band around Cleveland.
Little known band called Mushroom Head. Derek was really just so creative. I mean, look at this one. This is like crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think growing up in Cleveland, and if you were anywhere near interested in art at all, I mean, Derek Hess, and I mean, his work is great because I love that sketch work, and it just, like you said, it's creative. Like, I think the best creativity is something that just seems obvious, but you wouldn't have thought to do it. And I think he kind of does that a lot.
Derek was a really inspirational figure for me in particular. Those early shows at the Euclid Tavern really stuck with me. I would go there every single Monday night. When I moved to LA, I had this ambition to do my own concerts. And so I started promoting every Monday night. And I actually surpassed Derek. I think he did it for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
I hosted a concert in LA every Monday night in honor of that old Cleveland experience for a decade. So
Oh
from
wow, nice.
2005 to 2014, I hosted over 500 consecutive Monday night shows.
No kidding.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
it's really all because of Cleveland. I
Yeah.
have carried that with me. We didn't just work with Derek though.
Right.
Dave Cintron was like a big artist for us. I don't know if you know him. He was in
Mhm.
Dim Bulb and the Downside Special. I'm not sure what band he's in now. I'm sure he's probably doing something. He's definitely still an artist. And this guy named Scott Pickering, he was doing this thing called Puff Tube, and he was in a
Oh,
band called
nice.
Gem. And
That's
that
awesome.
was. And then we tried to get. Oh, look at this one. Here's another Dave Cintron. I love this one. This one's so weird. You were asking me before, it's sensationalism. I am a huge fan of
Okay.
tabloids. Yeah, and I love the shocking headlines. So, no tax dollars for LSD. That was something that conservatives were saying when the Rock Hall opened. That there should be no public money given to the Rock Hall because it glorified drug usage, LSD. So that's such a big problem.
Yeah, I
Is
know,
the
right? Yeah.
the LSD epidemic.
Well, yeah. Well, we can go into that whole thing. So I wanted to. So you took over U.S. Rocker. Now, did that change at all once you bought it out? Did you did you were like, oh, not? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you had free reign to begin with, but do you find that you were able to make some changes that you wanted to, or
I mean, it was a gradual evolution the whole time. So by the
yeah?
time it got to be 96, 97, and I was basically running the whole thing and then owning it, it was not a drastic change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the big difference was that I was trying to get those more purist writers. I'm not that person, but we were trying to get writers who were really telling it like it is. And that's when I met Tony Erba, and he became my roommate. Tony was a columnist for U.S. Rocker for years,
Yeah.
for that second half, and we lived together for a long time too. And Tony is, as you've interviewed him on the show, is one of these people who is just completely authentic at all time. People throw around that word authentic. I don't even know what the fuck it means anymore. But Tony is that. He is
Sure.
that. There's no debating
I think
that.
no pun intended, but integrity. I know he was not in
Yeah.
integrity, but yeah. But that's it, really. I mean, there's people with integrity, and I think he's one of them.
So
Um,
I think that was like a big difference. Like we went into much more. By then, I had really embraced my role as like publisher, and I saw myself as like and producer. Publisher and producer are kind of the same role. I really saw my role as like um, not a mediator or promoter anymore, but rather like a gatherer, you
Hmm.
know, of talent, and that was really liberating. You know,
Yeah.
it's nice to, you don't always have to be the star. I find that um, you have to be comfortable with uh, results you didn't expect,
Right.
which is sometimes can be challenging if you're a control freak. I'm not a control freak. I love it when experiments go off the charts. You know, I don't mind that. I actually encourage that, so I'm maybe an instigator in that way. But I always loved the sort of mad scientist vibe that we got in the later years, where we brought in these really real people like Tony Erba or Mike Cole or Steve Wainstead, these WCSB DJs who are also awesome writers, and Aiden Gautrone, who is lived in New York for many years now, and heads up the Museum of Television and Radio's publishing department. He's from Westlake, and so he was my deputy, my assistant editor, and these guys are all just really great writers, really great writers. Still really proud of all the work that they did.
Yeah. Well, speaking of writers, you mentioned Anastasia earlier. That's how you ended up meeting um, the head of
Brenda,
U.S. Rocker. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, how
Anastasia
did
was
you
a
end up?
huge part of this, and she was a writer who went from the Brenda era all the way through to the end,
Mhm.
and was kind of our rock through the whole U.S. rocker thing. I mean, she really was like, she's up there with Brenda and Trent. If she hadn't been there, the magazine wouldn't have been what it
Right.
was.
Well, because she didn't just write for U.S. Rocker.
So no, she didn't. Anastasia is one of these people that was like, she's like this Zelig type person. You know what I mean? Like she's like this person who's like, if you look real close at any photo, like she's probably there in the background, or maybe she took the photo. She
Yeah.
was at every significant rock event. I'd be like, say to her, I'd be like, man, I'm just so obsessed with Hawkwind, and she'd be like, oh yeah, I photographed their first show in America, which was at the Cleveland Agora in 1972. I'd be like,
Yeah.
you know and so she was and is some of these magazines she provided to me, the ones I didn't have. These are all going to the Rock Hall, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Anastasia has always been just the most generous and a great teacher, but also someone who, she's not someone to she's kind of a rebel. She's going to do
Yeah.
what she wants, and that's something I appreciate about her too. I think it's hard to be a woman and a rebel on the music scene, because it's been a traditionalist kind of place, I think, sometimes,
Hmm.
and I think in that way she's a real trailblazer.
Nice. And so, speaking of other publications, where do you guys think you fit in with, because Free Times was out back then as well as Scene Magazine. And do
Yeah.
what do you think? Did you how what would differentiate you from those publications?
Well, I mean, I think a big part of the difference was that US Rocker was a monthly. We
Yeah.
were really at a disadvantage. We could not write about up to the moment events like Scene or the Free Times could. They could say, hey, there's something happening on Thursday, go
All
there.
right.
We would be like, hey, a month from now, there's something happening, and then maybe the show would get canceled in between. You know how it is with that stuff. So, one of the things that Brenda and I did, was kind of refocus US Rocker on more, make it more for music fans, make it about the music. Also have it be more about album reviews, which is something, maybe the Free Times or Scene would have a couple album reviews in there.
Hmm.
But we, toward the end would have 30, 40 album reviews per issue. And that's
Right.
really what we became known for, is like knowing when new music was coming out and what
Right.
was it all about. Because before the internet, how could you know about these things, right? And so people, like, they would come to US Rocker for that. So that's a big difference. And another big difference was that, payola in publications, it was a significant thing. I mean,
Yeah.
this was like, we really had a hard time. Scene especially had sweetheart deals with all the record labels, who, by the way, used to all be in Cleveland at that time.
Oh wow.
And they would funnel their money to Scene, and Scene would put their bands and their ads in prominent places in the magazine. It was very hard for us to compete. You brought up Bill Peters. Bill Peters has been a friend of mine for a long time. He worked for Warner Electra Atlantic, WEA, which was over in off the 77. Anyway, he would funnel ads to US Rocker, and those Scene guys would get so mad. They would be pounding on their desk and yelling on the phone, like, how could you give that ad to US Rocker? How could you give that ad to US Rocker? And, I'm still grateful to Bill for this day for sticking to his guns and supporting like the little guy. We were definitely the underdog. And
Wow.
Bill really sent a lot of advertising money our way, which is how we were able to do what we did for so long.
Oh, that's awesome. So obviously, I'm still surprised that there's any publication out now with the internet. But towards the end, was that the downfall was the internet or what?
It would be nice to say that it was. It wasn't.
Okay.
It's a little nuanced.
Yeah.
Before the internet really took over, there was already a collapse in CD sales toward the end of the 90s. And that's really, basically what happened was everybody who wanted a CD of their old Michael Jackson album had already bought it by that point.
Right.
Their Carole King Tapestry, I got it on CD. So the mainstream record buyer who only owns like 12 albums, they had already thrown out their vinyl, and I was buying it for 25 cents at Record Exchange. And they had then purchased their CD copy, and they were like, done.
Yeah.
And it's not, people don't talk about it anymore, but there was a big slump in the late 90s in CD sales, and that's really what killed us.
Okay.
And the record labels all fled Cleveland. There was massive reorganization around that time. And, Cleveland used to be, because of the vaudeville era, like going back to the 20s, 30s, was a major hub for the Midwest. And Cleveland really lost that to Nashville in the 1990s. Nashville became the powerhouse for the region. And Cleveland just faded away. It was very sad. Cleveland had been so important. WMMS was rated the number one station on and off with K-Rock out here in LA. They would fight each other back and forth. There's actually a whole story about how like they would stuff the ballot box, for like the Billboard award for like most popular radio station in the country. But MMS would beat an LA station with 11 million people here. MMS would beat it because they broke like Bowie, Roxy Music, Bruce Springsteen, Meatloaf. They broke all those bands, and so Cleveland had a lot of prominence. But in the 90s, that faded, and Capitol left, WEA left, Sony left, and pretty soon Cleveland's record label row, which we had every record label, there was zero. They were all gone. Yeah.
Okay. So you were heavily reliant on the music industry for that publication.
Yeah. So okay. So here I'm going to hold up this random ass issue here. So you look at the back, and we were really reliant on things like Chicago's New Music Festival. I don't even know what that is, and then like Sam Ash, and like here, Ronnie James Dio and Wasp. These were major label ads, and they would pay a lot of money, like $1,000 for those, and when those weren't there anymore, it was really hard. I mean, look at this here. Like Napalm Death, I Hate God.
Right.
And, this was our main source of income, these ads. And without them, because there were no longer any local representatives, we weren't top of mind anymore, and we were trying to call on the phone, like ridiculous, right? Call or fax people in Nashville or New York or Chicago, and they're like, "Who the hell are you?" Cleveland, what? They would say that to me sometimes. Cleveland, Ohio. Like, how would you not know that? And it was humiliating.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I didn't know that. I didn't know that that presence of having those labels here. I mean, I guess it makes sense that it if they move away, then there's things that are reliant on that probably would fall away. I would imagine. Did you besides cold calling people and asking for ads and stuff like that? Did you try to restructure in any way?
I was very young at that time. I
Yeah.
was in my mid 20s, and if I knew then what I know now, I don't think we would have shut the magazine down. But I'm not sad that we did. I think that times were changing,
Yeah.
and also I needed to move on personally. When you're running an organization that's basically paycheck to paycheck, month to month, it can be very draining after a while.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of the work that we did.
Yeah.
Um, of course, like I said, if I knew what I knew now, I would have gone in there on the internet thing way before anybody else. We were actually online in like 1992 uh,
Yeah.
as like a textual version. You could go and see on AOL. We had a guy who would put it up on AOL every month, but there were no
Yeah.
pictures or any music or anything. So very different. But we. We could have been one of the first on the internet, but we just did not know. And frankly, as a shoestring operation, we did not have the money for equipment. So,
Yeah. Well,
so we
yeah.
moved on to other challenges, and it was sad, very sad that it ended. But
Yeah.
like I never stopped. Like here's the new Speak in Tongues book that just came out.
Hmm.
I just kept taking photos and writing journal entries like I was doing US Rocker.
Yeah.
And now, 20 years later, these are finally seeing the light because I
Hmm.
haven't had the time or the money to put them online before now. But, a worldwide pandemic has meant that SeanCarnage.com now has every issue of US Rocker and every Speak in Tongues photo and every Pats in the Flats photo, all the things that happened post Rocker
Yeah.
uh, up to 2002 when I moved to LA. Everything from 1998 to 2002 is just sitting in a filing cabinet. But now it's not. Now it's online. And I'm really proud of bringing that stuff back.
Yeah. I remember speaking tongues being a pretty important spot. It was the type of spot you had to bring your own beverages and stuff like that. Walk up the steps so talk a little bit about that book. How'd you get involved with that, and what is that? Just basically document the time at Speaking Tongues.
Well, it's pretty cool. I mean, I'm. This is not my book.
Right.
Was created by author Eric Sandy and really the publisher Joe Beal, who's a Speak in Tongues alumni. He owns Microcosm Publishing, who did this. It wouldn't have happened without him. And then Ken Blaze, who is a professional photographer in Cleveland, took a lot of the photos.
Yeah.
But one of the things is, as an amateur, I'm an amateur photographer and documentarian. I took snapshots, and
Yeah.
one of the things is, they had all these beautiful Ken Blaze like professional grade photos, but they didn't really have images of like the sort of like day to day life at Speak in Tongues, and that's what I supplied. So there are quite a few photographs in here of like just random like that's Kevin Jaworski, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell?
Yeah.
But the sort of like random stuff that happened in Cleveland at these shows, at these Speak in Tongues shows, that were not really captured in the more professional photographs. Those are all Sean Carnage photos,
Yeah.
and so I'm pretty proud of those, and
Nice.
it captures a different. It was a multifaceted scene, so it's just a different facet of that scene.
Yeah. And I so does that book just does it go from the beginning of Speak in Tongues and just kind of goes through the timeline,
It
or
does.
is
It's
it?
like an oral history, and it's
Yeah.
cool. Most of the interviewing was done, I think, like 7 or 8 years ago. But he updated some of the interviews since then. But it talks to not all. This is a massive cast of characters, but it's like a who's who of Cleveland people. Eric is was not old enough to be at Speak in Tongues, so he came in as an outsider, which was great
Yeah.
because he was able to approach it objectively. He's a real writer and journalist, unlike myself, and he was able to go and talk and interview in a journalistic way to a lot of the major players over the years, and then weave together this incredible
That's awesome.
story. Yeah, it's really a great read, even if you've never been to Speak in Tongues or have no interest in the music. It's really a story of how friends can have a fucked up idea and then actually do it,
That's
and
awesome.
it's kind of like an against the odds. It's kind of a feel good story.
Nice. That's awesome. Another place that I just recently, well, I drive by there all the time actually. And there's like, it's like almost like, when somebody gets killed along the highway and everyone puts up like teddy bears and stuff like that and like little commemorative things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, where Pat's in the Flats was, because it got demolished, um, there's all that kind of stuff going on right there. And a lot of people, I mean, I noticed, I knew there was some pretty good, you know, national acts that would go through there. And it's just I don't know how to say it. It doesn't seem like the type of place that would be, you know. So with your writer mind, just for everyone out there, if you can just describe Pats in the Flats and your experience with that place.
Well, if you go to my site, I recently wrote like a recap of Pats in the Flats from my perspective. I'll just give you the short
Sure.
version of it. I
Sean
recommend
Carnage.
checking it out online though, because it's got on SeanCarnage.com because it's got
Yeah.
photos to illustrate it. But the short version is that it was kind of a local place in the 80s and early 90s. And then, sort of in the mid 90s, and it was a fun place to go. Great place to get drunk, cheap beer, and like wacky ass bands. Like the
Yeah.
kind of band you would only see once. Like I think the first time I went there was for the Battle of the Worst Bands. I remember seeing a band called Shit the Bed,
Yeah.
which was a term I had never heard before. And I was just like, this band is ridiculous. And I was so impressed by Pat, the owner of Pat's in the Flats, the proprietor, because she would stand there near the stage and she'd be picking up empties and stuff. And she would pause there and she would look at these fools doing shit the bed and just go, and then move on. And I was like, this
Yeah.
woman's a saint. I'm like, I'd be flipping out. These guys are ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they're fucking destroying shit up on stage and like pooping in a pizza box. Like what the hell are these guys doing? It's a true story. But later on in the mid to late 90s, Mark Letty, who's co-owner of the Beachland, and this guy named Doug Nemzura, who had been up to that point a bartender at the Euclid Tavern, and also a musician in the band Quasimodo. They started booking garage rock and like blues and traditional rock influenced acts down there, and it was the first place that people like the Black Keys played, and White Stripes' first show outside of Detroit. Historic stuff. That's not something that Pat did on her own, though. That's really Mark and Doug, and
Yeah.
Pat provided the space, and that kind of opened up like a whole second era of Pat's in the Flats, where it was a place where you could maybe become a star. It went from this like dive bar weirdo place to dive bar weirdo place where you could be the next, you could be the next Black Keys, and so
Mhm.
that was really exciting. It was like, wow, this place that is just this dump that's down the street, like underneath the bridge, is like
Yeah.
could be a stepping stone to pop culture, and it brought a new zaniness down there, and that was an era after, sort of a little bit after that era, early 2000s. I started booking shows down there after Speaking Tongues,
Okay.
and had a lot of national acts down there too. It was just it was a really great place, and Pat was an inspiration, and her just sort of stoic, like stiff upper lip, like show must go on thing had a big impact on me. It's very similar to Derek, and
Mm.
just very grateful to her.
Well, yeah, and that was there before Tremont was cool, right?
It was a shot in a beer bar where you'd go down there, you'd be working repairing like the something at the depot down the street, like where like the gas was offloaded from the barge or whatever, and you'd run in there at lunchtime. And bosses accepted that shit back in the day.
Yeah.
Like, of course it's lunch. You're gonna go have a shot and a beer, and then you're gonna come back and like wrench some more.
Right. Yeah. And, for people out there that, for anyone that's already still with us and you care about Cleveland and all, um, for anyone that's listening to this, though, you think that we're talking about a concert venue, but there was no stage, you know? It
No,
was just like an old time diner, right?
yeah. Another one of the favorite things in my life is, I love David Lynch, and I'm a big
Hmm.
fan of Twin Peaks. And have you watched Twin Peaks?
Yes.
Like the Roadhouse. They always go to this bar.
Yeah.
Uh, I've always thought of Pat's as like the Roadhouse. It's at the
Right.
crossroads of like night and day and industry and the unknown. It's just sort of this weird transitional space, and everyone's equal there. There's no stage. You're all on the floor, even the musicians. And I think in our world now, it's getting harder and harder to find uh, non-hierarchical spaces. I don't really think Pat ever set out to make a statement. She was just running this bar that she inherited, and it just carried on and on and on.
Right.
But I still think it's really important.
For
It's
sure.
and it's super sad that she's gone. It's super sad that Pat's is gone. But thank God that it did happen, and I think it inspired so many people in Cleveland. I know that those ripples will be going on for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, okay. So let's go back to your timeline now. So so unfortunately, U.S. rocker, you kind of closed shop there. Um, then what? Is that when you said, hey, you know what? Bright lights, big city, got to go out to LA?
I wish, Vince. I'm not that
Yeah,
smart. I sometimes am. What's the definition of insanity? Repeating the same thing.
right.
Expecting different results.
Well, before you go on though, I do want to say it's come up a couple times. I don't know if it was on camera. I think it did a couple times, but you 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 say that, oh yeah, when you went to school, you say you keep changing your mind, and I've heard often like it's not really about, it's like the most motivated people change their mind the most to find out what it is they want to get into. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think you're an example of that. Um, but yeah,
Cleveland's full of examples like that. Cleveland, I was saying how people like wouldn't go from the west side to the east side for 2 years, but
yeah,
I have to say that the people that I fell in with in Cleveland, the Tony Urbas, the Mike Shoemakers, the Derek Hesses, these people, Ron Kretsch, Ed Sotelo, all these people that all the speak in tongues guys and girls, like they were doers.
yeah.
They were really super motivated, and I found my tribe with those people.
Hmm.
Uh, they are as motivated as anybody I've ever known here in LA.
Yeah.
Um, there's not, it's not an accident. Look at you. I mean, you're doing this podcast. Why the hell are you doing this podcast? It's like you're a doer, man. And Cleveland has a particular kind of um, ethos where it paradoxically, you might not cross the river and go to the other side of town, but you might also be like an artist or a musician, and you'll work on something and do all this stuff for like to express yourself and what you're going through, and it's a very positive place to be in that regard.
Nice.
So US Rocker was over, and I wasn't going to stop. I just wasn't doing US Rocker anymore. I was hanging out, speaking tongues. We were doing this recording studio called Invisible City, which you can look up on Discogs, but we recorded, literally hundreds of sessions there for about 6 years. And it did eventually get to the point where, in 2002, after Speaking Tongues closed, I'm like, I just don't have anything here.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep working at a coffee shop, which is what I was doing at the very end. As much as I was grateful for that job, I wanted to go work as a producer and, going to LA.
Right.
my very first night in LA, and we should probably wrap up soon because unfortunately I have to go. I'm so
Okay,
sorry. I
that's fine.
really enjoyed talking, but I do
Yeah.
want to say that um, my very first night in LA, guess who's playing? Cobra Verde. So I'm hanging out at the Rainbow up on Sunset Boulevard. I had just driven across the country to LA, and I'm hanging out with John Pekovic and all these people sitting around at the bar,
Yeah.
just like it was back home. And
That's
those
awesome.
guys were so nice to me. They were, one of those few Cleveland bands that toured all the time, and John
Yeah.
knows everybody everywhere. John is like, hey, this is my friend Sean. This is my friend Falling James. He's the guy who used to be married to Courtney Love.
Okay.
And he's like, James, Sean needs a job. He just arrived tonight. And James is like, oh, cool. Come and work with me at this cafe tomorrow. So
Sweet.
here I am, thanks to my Cleveland friends, hanging out, cushioning my arrival in LA, and they got me a job. And I started
Yeah.
working the next day. Because when you're from Ohio, you're like, or from the Rust Belt, you're like, I can't go like a day without a job. Like, I
Right.
gotta hustle. I gotta pay that heating bill. And it took me a while to settle in. Like, oh yeah, I don't have a heating bill anymore. I don't need to pay for
Well,
that. But
that's the thing. If you keep moving forward, things will happen, And it was obviously, things happen. You made it happen, and that was just extra encouragement right there, right? But okay, I know you got to go, but I just wanted to say, so what are you doing right now? And I guess maybe we can go into that real quick and then call it
yeah,
a day.
totally. Well, I during the pandemic, I already mentioned I put every issue of US Rocker online. You can still buy paper issues mainly from the second 5-year run, so say from about 1993 to about 1998. I price them really low, usually $5 or $10, and shipping's included.
Hmm.
But you can also download every single US Rocker for free, which I encourage people to do. It's amazing. I think my favorite part is looking at the local club ads, which
Yeah.
say so much about what was going on, even more than maybe sometimes the things you were writing. It's so funny. It's like watching old
Right.
TV for commercials. It's just nostalgic.
Yeah.
If you go to us-rocker.com, you can go directly there, or seancarnage.com. There's a little badge, US Rocker badge there. Just click on that. You'll end up in the same place.
Okay.
Um, if you're on seancarnage.com, click on the Cleveland tab and just go back and back and back. I'm really proud of, in the last year, like I said, I've added maybe over 30 posts, actually maybe closer to 40 or 50 posts on seancarnage.com with photos that have never been seen before of the Euclid Tavern, Pats in the Flats, Speak in Tongues, the Grog Shop, and all kinds of temporary venues like playing under the Superior Viaduct and all the crazy places that Clevelanders have shows or did
That's
have
awesome.
shows when I was there. And no one has ever seen these photos before, and I try to include different points of view too. I don't have time to write an oral history,
Yeah.
although I did for US Rocker, but I did still, as people would comment on Facebook, I'm like, screw Zuckerberg, man. I would take those comments and be like, can I take your comments and put them in my post so that they're not locked in Facebook forever? So a lot of these posts have contributions from other people too.
Oh,
And
nice.
that's, what I've spent a lot of time doing these last couple of years is bringing that all online. And I'm also really excited to announce I stopped promoting or booking shows in 2016, but you're hearing it here first. I'm going to start booking one Friday a month at this new place called Oracle Tavern here in LA.
Oh,
If
nice.
you're ever visiting, you got to come down and see one of my shows. And if Cleveland bands hear this, please hit me up. Second Friday of every month. Oracle Tavern starts September 16th,
Nice.
and we're gonna go from there. We're gonna do some more Cleveland chaos in LA. And if you're not in a band, you're from Cleveland, come and see me because I love hanging out with Cleveland and Ohio people. In LA,
Nice.
it's always a treat to, even if we're not in the same age group, to meet somebody who has like a similar
Yeah.
background and shoot the shit.
Nice. And you said that's Oracle? Is that OARCLE?
Yeah, LA is one of these places where people can like have a trust fund and like have a vanity project bar and stuff like that. Not me, I don't own it. I'm just a booker there. But yes, the woman who owns this is a fashion photographer, and she's got a cool vibe happening down there, and she loves rock and roll, and it's trying to get a scene going. So yeah, we'll see.
Nice.
We'll see how it's going. We're gonna bring some good music in there, and even better than that, we're gonna bring a lot of good people. So it'll be a friendly place.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Sean, dude, seriously, thank you so much. I know people say this to me all the time, which yeah, I'm like, oh, stop it. But hey, thank you for all you do.
Oh,
You know,
see, I can't. Like, I can't take a compliment. It
right,
always
right.
hurts when somebody says that, right? A little bit. But hey, you know what? Actually, I can't take a compliment. I have changed. I thank you, Vince, and thank you
Yeah,
for what you do. But you know what? I do this not for myself anymore. This is for everyone else and kind of for posterity too.
yeah,
We should be. Everyone's digital now, and we should be represented there. And
yeah,
we're doing what we're doing. I know you're doing it to get voices out there, and that's important.
yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, Sean, once again, thank you so much. And
Thank you. My
yep.
pleasure.
And Sub CLE, we're out.